Hare Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Sri Vaishnava. Welcome back all. We're starting chapter 8 today. I'm enjoying my green detox drink. Forgive me while I take a sip here and there throughout the show. Once again, I have easily remembered to set up H.D. Goswami's translation to do first. So this, once again, we're still on a streak of cluster by cluster. This time it's about 5 verses. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, 4 verses that fit nicely within a cluster. Verses 1 through 4 of chapter 8 is our first cluster, which we're doing today. The next 4 after that are very awesome, significant verses all about death. Please join me or not in glorifying and invoking our Mr. Sri Krishna and his Holy of Holies, the literary incarnation, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, as it is. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. All right, H.D. Goswami first. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Arjuna said, "What is Brahman? What is higher self? And what is action, O ultimate person? What principle governs nature? What principle is said to govern the gods? Who governs sacrifice here in this body, Madhusudana? And how? And how are disciplined souls to know you at the time of passing?" The Lord said, "Brahman is the supreme imperishable. Its nature is said to be higher self. Capital H, capital S. Creation that generates a being state of being is termed karma, in italics. A perishing state is nature's principle, and divinity's principle is the person, capital P. I alone, here in this body, am sacrifice's principle, O best of body bearers. Capital B for best and capital B for body. Now there's one footnote after higher self. And it says karma. That makes no sense. I think it's I highlighted a note here, and maybe I called that note. Okay, there we go. Yeah, it's not showing up there now. Zoom in. Okay, footnote 145. Brahman is ultimately a supreme eternal person. So the literal translation, H.D. Goswami, just says higher self. And then the footnote says, he's saying, well, it's not an impersonal self. It's a person, and it's the supreme eternal person. So higher self, more extended, means the supreme eternal person. All right, that's it. We can now get on with Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, verse by verse. Verse 1. Arjuna inquired, "O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation, and what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Small purport here for obvious reasons. This is just Arjuna asking a question. Not much else going on here. Very little notes here. And so what is Arjuna asking? He's basically asking, how is this world structured, but specifically categorically? He's not just saying, oh, what are the trees? What are the animals? What is that? What is this? It's not really a childish question. It's a more advanced question concerning categorical truth or tattva. But at the same time, it's not asking about the most supreme tattva. Arjuna, it seems, is asking, like, what is my tattva? What is the tattva of the world, and how do they interact? And if that does have to do with supreme entities like demigods or Brahman, please tell me that too, Krishna. But and that's interestingly the first and last part of his question. What is Brahman? That's first. And the last one, what are the demigods? That's the last question. But in the middle, what is the self? What is karma? What is Maya, material manifestation? So those three questions are really the main point here. And Arjuna also wants to know about the supreme aspects, of course. And I think he's being respectful and eloquent by sandwiching these more mundane questions within the realm of the supreme, because Arjuna has not forgotten who he's talking to here. He is talking to the supreme person and the great slayer of demons, Madhusudana, as we'll see in, I believe, the next verse. Yep, the next verse. Now, the second paragraph of the purport here is significant. Arjuna has addressed the Supreme Lord as Purushottama, supreme person, which means he's putting these questions not simply to a friend, but to the supreme person, knowing him to be the supreme authority able to give definitive answers. We'll be moving on to verse 2 in a second. Verse 2. How does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body, and in which part does he live, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Arjuna's question about the time of death will be answered explicitly in a few verses, but that means next week in the next verse cluster. And it's also important to know how great a student Arjuna is, because his question, especially how Prabhupada translates it, presupposes that there is a Lord of sacrifice living in our body. And by Arjuna asking that question in that specific way, Arjuna is showing Krishna and us that he has already accepted that truth that Krishna has given Arjuna previously. And we should be following Arjuna's example. We should be reading and listening and following Sri Bhagavan, just like Arjuna does here. So, what is the question? How does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body? Because that question begins with how, it linguistically, logically, definitively presupposes that there is a Lord of sacrifice living in the body for sure. Otherwise, you can't ask this question. You can only ask, how does something work, if you believe that there is that thing that exists. You can't say, how does a car work, if you don't believe that a car can exist. Once again, I'm not being condescending. I know if there are any, modern white people, kind of English speaking, etc., people listening to this, they think I'm just speaking to you like a child. I'm speaking to myself as a child, most of all. because that's the best way to understand anything. That's how you know you truly understand something in its most essential wisdom-based sense, as opposed to the advanced, sophisticated cleverness type understanding, which is for fools and demons, actually. That's where the demons are proficient, is in the more sophisticated, complicated details of knowledge, as opposed to the simple, universal, fundamental, essential truths born of wisdom, which is what I'm studying and practicing, not just in the Gita. It's also why I do judo, and I'm happy to study Aristotle and Confucius as well, and many other great munis and sages. Jesus has many great wisdom sayings in the New Testament. Judge the tree by its fruits. This is common sense, but you'd be very surprised how few people actually practice this. I was telling my parents yesterday about how my coworkers just fail at this regard. I've now given maybe $300 worth of gifts to my coworkers in the months I've been here. It might be like $5 here, $5 there, but it's been a few months. So we're well past $100, $200 I've given to everyone there. And most of them have given nothing, but they don't like me because I talk about being vegetarian and other virtuous things that makes them uncomfortable because they're sinners. So I'm the bad guy, and they're really nice, and they never, they stay in their lane of ignorance, and they're all there together. They're all one collective. So I'm the weird bad guy, even though I'm actually doing a lot more good. Some of them are starting to get on the good side, but it's hard. It's a hard job. So most people have drink themselves to semi-oblivion after work, and that does work on a day-to-day basis, but it does not work on a long-term basis. So anyway, notes here say to read the second paragraph. So Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana because Krishna once killed a demon named Madhu. So why does Arjuna say, use this holy name of Krishna, Madhusudana? Where's the demon here that Arjuna is referring to? Prabhupada says, Arjuna is a Krishna conscious devotee. So these doubts are like demons. These kinds of doubts should not be arising in the mind of someone like Arjuna. And since Krishna is so expert in killing demons, Arjuna addresses him as Madhusudana. So Krishna might kill those demonic doubts that arise in Arjuna's mind. So once again, this is a great example of how to be a really good student and disciple. Arjuna is glorifying Krishna in this verse, and he's also humbling himself in a glorifying way. Actually, he's saying, oh, I'm not like a little baby student. Oh, Krishna, please take your time with me. Oh, I might need 10 years to learn this lesson. Let's go really slowly, please. No, Arjuna is saying, I'm ready. I'm hungry for the truth. You got to give it to me fast. Give it to me hard. Just like you'd kill a demon. I'm ready. Bring it on. This is good discipleship shown by Arjuna. Prayana Kale. It's in the final paragraph of the purport from Prabhupada. Means whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. And once again, that we'll talk about next week. Arjuna questions how one's mind can remain fixed on Krishna's lotus feet at such times of death when, our voice may get choked up and with our throat and death happening, and we may not be able to chant any holy names. And we're panic-stricken. How can we still think of Krishna at the time of death? That's what Arjuna is concerned about. That's it for verse 2. We'll do verse 3 in a second. Verse 3. The Supreme Lord said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called the Self. Action pertaining to the development of these material bodies is called karma, or fruitive activities. Now, for this, in case I don't at the beginning of the stream say something else, I did prepare beforehand for this reading. And when I read the first time, I didn't notice this typo, which I notice now. And I'm going to bring to your attention once again, not to fault find, not to fault find Prabhupada, but perhaps to fault find someone else. But anyway, it says, the Supreme Lord said, comma, the indestructible, comma. So there's a capital T for the. That's a typo. That's technically incorrect in English. Does it matter? No, it does not. And once again, this is one of those edits that Srila Prabhupada was giving authority to a few of his disciples to fix. Because if you want it to be totally perfect, English does have rules. They're quite often stupid rules, but there are rules in English. And if instead of a comma, it was a semicolon, that capital T could be justified. But because it's just a comma, you'd either want a lowercase t or change it to a semicolon. Once again, it doesn't matter at all. But that's the kind of edit that should be edited by whoever it was, Hayagriva, Jayadvaita, whoever it was who was in charge of this particular verse at this time. Like, that's something you'll edit, which doesn't change the meaning at all, doesn't change the words at all. It's totally superfluous and non-essential. And once again, in hindsight, it's 2020. What should have Prabhupada done? And I'm not saying he's not perfect. He was perfect. He is perfect. We live moment to moment, whether you're pure devotee or not. And Prabhupada was very compassionate to his disciples. I don't think he realized just how demonic we are. I'm not saying I'm different from them. When I came to this Bhagavad Gita, I was 25, and I was still quite wicked. It's taken me, after reading this, in my own time, with many years to practice and study very carefully at my own time without any introduction from some cult or whatever. It's taken me time to calm down, and I could be able to be like a good editor for something like this without being demonic. But Prabhupada just didn't know how bad a job they were going to do. If he did, I'm sure he would have just said no edits at all. After this 1972 edition, whatever, he's like, that's it. Don't touch it. Which he did say. He did say, as soon as I publish something and I say it's done eternally. It's only because he authorized an edit to happen that it can happen. But if he doesn't do that, it's eternal. It's what the Acharya has said, and that's that. It's Arsha Prayog. Or is it Arsha Prayog? Arsha means rishi, and Prayog or Prayog is says what the rishi says is what is true, and that's it. And this is a long tradition in India, like any other tradition in India. And there are many examples of holy scripture in India that have, weird spelling mistakes or different grammar problems, but that's, the will of the Lord. And a lot of times they're not actually mistakes, kind of like the happy accidents in a Bob Ross painting. They're not actually an accident. They actually make the painting more charming and interesting and organic and so on. So it's not actually a mistake anyway. Okay, let's get into verse 3. So Krishna is now answering Arjuna's question, and he's, as usual, giving definitive answers. So And this is why we love Srila Prabhupada and the acharyas before him, because and this is how we know they are acharyas, because they are following in the footsteps of their Lord, who speaks in this way. X is Y, therefore Y is X. It's like very explicit, honest, clear, as it is. Hashtag as it is. So I wrote here, the first part of the answer is more confusing than the second. So we are the self. We know we are self. So does that mean we are also Brahman? It's a little confusing. What we know for sure in the second paragraph of the purport is that we are never para Brahman. And that's what Prabhupada states here. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but is never called para Brahman. And that's something, even though it may not be explicitly stated in many verses that Krishna says, I am para Brahman and this is Brahman and they're not the same. He may not explicitly state it, but the complete and total lack of calling a living entity para Brahman, while at the same time we do have evidence of Krishna referring to himself as Paramatma, we know just from that there is a supreme personal God, and he is Para Brahman, and we are not. And the third paragraph is once again a very acharya, as it is, kind of exposition on karma and reincarnation, and shows how the process of sacrifice continues in this world. Sacrifice and karma are interchangeable in these verses. It seems to me they're much the same thing. Arjuna and Krishna are talking really about action in a basic sense, not in a particular sense of, okay, I'm doing my 4:30 a.m. Mangalarati for this particular deity in this particular way or whatever. No, it's just like we're living in this world, we're doing things to get something. That's karma. And it's also sacrifice. I'm sacrificing my time and my attention and so on. And most people, most living entities are doing that for a specific end. So that is karma and that is sacrifice. And how does it work? Well, Prabhupada says the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them in this life or the next. And then eventually the merit of that sacrifice is exhausted. Then the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain. That's a literal descension. Then takes on the form of grains. The grains are eaten by man, transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice, and so repeat the same cycle. And they may do sacrifices to Satan, in which case they would descend further to a hellish planet, right? But, you may go higher, you may go lower, but this is how the cycle just continues indefinitely. Or perpetually is the word Prabhupada uses here on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. And then the final paragraph of the purport is about how, once again, the Lord is not impersonal. And Prabhupada gives one example on how impersonalist commentators may assume that Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world, and they may substantiate this by using chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But this verse uses the specific term eternal fragment of myself, capital M. I did look at that verse, it's true. So, basically, Prabhupada in a purport like this is a recurring theme in Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. Just as Krishna has recurring themes in how he speaks to Arjuna. Prabhupada has recurring themes in his purports and how he speaks to the reader, to the contemporary reader in English. And for him, the primary foe, the primary ignorance that Prabhupada is really trying to defeat with this Gita, especially compared to all the other New Testament, Quran, and so on, all the other similar ancient texts of revelation, we might call them, is that God is a person. That's really one of the very, very central and important themes that Prabhupada himself, with the backing of Lord Chaitanya and his guru and Lord Krishna, they're really helping Prabhupada drive this point home. And that's true, and that's great. And I don't want to belittle it, but I will say that 1960s America is different from 1800s India or 1600s India. One second, please. So there are two kinds of living entities, right? There's Daiva Asura. Daivasura. There's Devas and Asuras. So the Asuras are always Asuras, but they do morph in how they are Asuras from time to time and place to place. And same with the Devas. The Devas morph in their divinity in slightly different way. They have different bhavs, a different ethos in different times and places. So the Mayavadi impersonalist of centuries ago in India is still very much alive and well in India, as far as I know. But in the West, that's not the primary enemy. New Age, the New Age movement within the West is, you could call, a Mayavadi movement in this sense. And it is purporting to be a particular, and I'd say smaller danger to certain people like myself and many others in my demographic, like the hippie type person who could potentially be a great Krishna conscious devotee, but they stop at a certain point because some New Age guy says, no, we're all one, and you just get sucked into that. But to me, a bigger problem is someone who cannot even come to the New Age. They can't even come to impersonal Brahman because they're so utterly consumed by materialism and atheism. That's the bigger enemy, is the idea that we are this body, and that God is bad and religion is bad. That's like all religion is bad. That's a bigger enemy, and it's happening in Korea too. One quick example: I told my coworker, she sits next to me. She's Korean, but she's lived in America and China for years. She's trilingual, so she does have a lot of different cultural experience, and but she's obviously secular, and I'm starting to think she's actually demonic because of particularly this conversation where I said, oh yeah, I'm doing a Bible class. She's like, oh, that's real. I was like, yeah, it's a little weird. It's a Korean church group, and I'm not even Christian, but they were nice. And, I just told them out, I met a few people and they were nice to me. It's like, oh, I'll hang out. They brought me to some good food, Korean food places, which is hard for me to do. It's nice having aunties, especially some older women who can, who really know the area and take me to a great place. And, and they treat me, then I treat them. And it's very, nice situation. But I told her zero details of this Bible course and this church that I'm participating in. Zero details. All I said was, they're Christians. It's a Bible course. They were nice to me. I tried it out. That's all I said to her. And she said, ooh, it sounds like a cult. That's not how it works. And by how it works, I mean, that's not how English works. Remember, this is an English teacher as well. So the word cult has a specific meaning. And there was nothing I said that means it is a cult or is not a cult. So the only reason she said that is because she's coming from the belief or the worldview or the ego or whatever that believes that most religion is bad, most religions are cults, and cults are bad, and they should not be given any time at all. So that's like the secular world. So and what's his name? Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Swami. I remember reading some strong quotes from him on how the secular world is a great enemy that we should be constantly fighting against. And this is, just a great example of that. Once again, I'm really focusing on rationality as a main way out of here, because when you just sit down with a dictionary, you learn what cult means, you learn what religion means, you learn what God means, and you just take a step back and actually look at it for a second, take a quick, very cursory glance at history. You just take a very quick rational look at all this. You can say, oh, yeah, they're not all bad. Some are good, some are bad. And from that place, someone like me or H.D. Goswami and others in our rationalist, ethos can start to work with you. And, it depends how compassionate we are. For me, I'm happy to, if I meet someone and they're like on the right path, but, they're more destined to be like a Muslim or a Buddhist, I'll help them be a good Muslim or a good Buddhist. I have no problem with that. I would like if they would, follow me in the way I want to do things in particular, which is, Krishna consciousness and Prabhupada and so on. But if they want to, if they're not ready, but I can help them with what they are ready for to do, then that's great, man. But I meet so many people who I just can't do anything with. I just can't. As long as I'm maintaining my, rationalist stance, I can't. So, and that's, I have to accept my own fault for that as well, because I could help a lot more people if I were to give that up and just be really in the moment and working on just serving people in how they want to be served. And that is the Krishna conscious way. That's what Prabhupada did. He didn't, go against his own principles or whatever, but, he knew most people aren't right. He can't have a deep rational discourse with most people, and he didn't try to. He came to people at their level in a very grounded, very gentlemanly way, and there's much benefit in that. People start to really respect you and listen to you. Even if they can't accept and follow you, they'll say, oh, he was a gentleman, and so on. And I can't do that for many reasons. I mean, the main reason is I'm just personally not willing to live in a world that is not rational, that is sub-rational, subhuman, etc. I'd rather just stay fully all the way clear from people like that. And that's what I do. We'll see how, maybe I'm being stubborn, and we'll see how it goes beyond that. Yep. So now we're ready for verse 4. All right. Only 34 minutes in. Verse 4. Physical nature is known to be endlessly mutable. The universe is the cosmic form of the Supreme Lord, and I am that Lord represented as the Supersoul, dwelling in the heart of every embodied being. The key word for me here is represented. Krishna himself is beyond the Supersoul form, but at the same time, that form is perhaps the most immediate and personal way for the jiva in the cosmic world to get back in touch with the original world, the world of Sri Bhagavan, the world from which the cosmos emanates. You can taste or experience that original world in Brahma Jyoti, or the impersonal oneness manifestation, you can definitely taste what is beyond the cosmos in that form, but that's not it. That's not everything. And when you're stuck in that level, that's Mayavadi, because it's just not true. The absolute truth, or the highest truth, is a person, and he has many names. My favorite name for him is Krishna. And before Sri Bhagavan realization, we should first meet Krishna in our hearts, the Krishna who's sitting right next to you right now. Here's you, here's Krishna, buddy, buddy, right next to each other. In the purport, Prabhupada explicitly states that those who are not ready for approaching the super soul manifestation instead look out and reach out to the gigantic universal form of the Lord, and which I just mentioned briefly is not the end, is not the highest path, whatever. So we could call it a lesser path, but even though that's there is still a bona fide way to be on that path and to go upwards from there, which once again is given explicitly by Prabhupada. There's only one paragraph in this purport. So this gigantic form is contemplated by the neophyte who cannot approach the Supreme Lord as Supersoul. The neophyte is advised to contemplate the universal form, whose legs are considered the lower planets, and whose eyes are considered the sun and moon, and whose head is considered the upper planetary system. So even if you're seeing, all the cosmos as one God, one reality, one truth, whatever, that one truth you can still contemplate on as different body parts of one person, which is actually true anyway. And after enough contemplation of that, eventually you'll see that, because that one great big person is the all of everything, and we are part of him, he is also part of us. And then you'll start to look within, and you can see that same person within you, although it's not a gigantic person, it's a very, 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 very small person, but it's the same person. And that's Paramatma. And then once you are, comfortable enough and, intimate enough with Paramatma, then you can be eligible to once again meet that same person in his more personal form. That's the main thing of Krishna consciousness, is we judge advancement, spiritual advancement, we judge simply by degrees of intimacy and personality. Radical personalism, you might say. Just getting more and more personal basically means more and more advanced. But it can't be fake. There's many neophyte devotees who might jump right into the 10th canto and be like, oh, my rasa is, I'm the father. I'm in the parental relationship with the Supreme Lord. And I am the fourth incarnation of Nanda Maharaj and in the blah, 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 blah. And they may use all these big, once again, that's how the demons talk, using specific, detailed, complicated language that sounds very advanced, but it's not earned. People like Prabhupada, who actually are advanced, they don't just start talking about all that stuff like that. That's very special and confidential, and only within closed doors, with an audience of just one or two people at a time, will they maybe talk about these sorts of things, because that's responsible. That's being just a mature adult, actually. that's how I see it. Like, being virtuous is really just being a grown-up, and being vicious is just being a child. It's just being like, well, I can do whatever I want. It's just immature. It's just like childish, and in a bad way. There's a good way to be childlike, which is divine. Mark 10:15, for truly I tell you, those who cannot receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. It's got to be my favorite verse in the Christian Bible because I think it's the only one I've memorized word for word. Maybe I got one preposition wrong there, but that's that. So that's all my notes for today. And once again, there's only one paragraph at the purport here. One more thing I'll state from Prabhupada. The word eva, which is used in so many verses in the Gita, it means only or certainly. It's important in this context because by this word, the Lord stresses that the Paramatma is not different from him. The Paramatma, the seated beside the individual soul, is the witness of the soul's activities and is the source of consciousness. The supersoul gives the jiva an opportunity to act freely, and he witnesses his activities. And the functions of all these manifestations of the Supreme Lord automatically become clarified for the pure Krishna conscious devotee engaged in transcendental service of the Lord. I'm going to try and find Ava now. Yep. It's Avatra. So, well, the grammar is, foreign for us, but just reading it word for word, how Prabhupada, this verse, it's the physical manifestation constantly changing, nature. Now, my translation of that is, the physical manifestation has a nature of being constantly changing. I said the same thing, I just made it English grammar. Continuing. The universal form and, including all demigods like the sun and moon, the supersoul, I certainly, in this body of the embodied, the supreme. Okay, that one's way harder to disentangle with our English grammar. But Purushaha, that's the Sanskrit word for the universal form. But Purushaha also means person, I believe. And the word for supersoul here is actually Adhi Jagya. Adi Jagyaha, the original sacrifice. And I think that's why Arjuna talks about the Lord of sacrifice within. That's another term for the supersoul within besides Paramatma. But basically a paraphrase translation of what Krishna says here is, I am certainly the supersoul living, the supreme supersoul, certainly living in this body of the embodied. So it's very, very, Prabhupada is right. It's very, very clear here. Not just that Krishna himself is the supersoul within the body of the embodied, but that is certainly the case. You need to be really good at Sanskrit grammar to know exactly what Ava is referring to. So I'll just take Prabhupada's word for it, that Ava is referring to the fact that Krishna is within the body. It's not, it could be certainly that he's the supersoul or certainly that he's supreme, but you have to know grammar to know for sure what that is. You have to know Sanskrit grammar to be able to say what exactly Ava refers to. In the same way that if you don't know English grammar, you may think that, the Big Apple of New York City, maybe in your language, the adjective big may be, 2 words ahead of the word it's describing. You may think big refers to New York City, which is true colloquially, but in that sentence, the Big Apple of New York City, big is describing apple. And then the Big Apple, that phrase, that whole phrase is describing New York City in a figurative way. Very simple sentence that any native English speaker will say, oh, yeah, I know what you mean, whatever. And likewise, there are people who know Sanskrit very well, and they can read this and go, oh, yeah, Ava, yeah, he's certainly in this body. Yes, no problem. I can't do that. But I have no problem taking it for granted that Prabhupada can do that. And I'm going to go with him. That Ava means Krishna is the super soul. Krishna is the supreme super soul. And that supreme super soul is certainly living in the body of the embodied. That's that for today. All right, 45 minutes, not too long. See you next week where we talk about the moment of death. Hari Bol, Hari Krishna, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Shri Vaishnava, Shri Vaishnavi.